And then in 4th grade, I think we had Mrs. Cornish, and I remember that Mrs. Cornish, she was like a little stubby lady, but we built these things and we put them on our desk. These paper, and we draw all over them. And I remember I made a little sign, and you'd pull the string, and it would go, and it would say "Nerd Alert" because it was like when Goonies. I totally did that. 5th grade, Mr. Howiak, and I remember that.
This episode of iFanboys brought to you by GoDaddy.com and Netflix.com.
Hey, welcome to another episode of iFanboy, the comic book discussion show. My name is Ron Richards, and I'm here with...
I'm Josh Flanagan.
And I'm Connor Kilpatrick. One of the great things about comics is there are all types. Every type of comic you can think of. One of the most popular types, I think, in the indie side of comics is the autobiography. It's telling your own story.
Autobiography stories are like, when people think of indie comics, that's the first thing they think of. And a lot of times they think...
It's a negative stereotype.
Yeah, and they'll just think, well, it's just a sad, pathetic cartoonist sitting by himself talking about his sad life and how bad it is. Yeah. Oh, me.
I don't think The Crow's all that bad.
No.
It might be.
Why?
Portions of it
I haven't done my research.
Okay.
I don't believe that he got...
no, but leading up to it. Anyway, but yeah, no, a lot of times it's kind of a lot of wallowing or a lot
We've
of...
seen it mentioned on the website when we talk about autobiography. People go, oh, it's more whiny indie artists. It's not.
It's not at all.
I mean, if you think
Some
of
the best stories.
If you think of novels and you think of autobiography or memoir...
I think of whiny novelists sitting in the coffee shop. I don't.
One of my favorite authors, Kerouac, all those books were all autobiographical, On the Road, all that kind of stuff. She changed the names and made some people look a little better than they were. but that's part of storytelling.
And in this sense, one of the very best kinds of stories that like a writer artist especially can tell is a story about their life because they remember it in a certain way and they can picture it. And occasionally you have collaborations. We're going to talk about some of them here. But it is one of those things that comics do really well. I don't know if it's because of that personal nature of being able to do it. But some of my favorite comics, especially indie comics that I've ever read, have been autobiographical stories.
Right there with you.
So we thought we would take some of this. There's a lot.
There's so many. And we're sure they're not going to hit them all.
No.
But we're going to talk about some we really like, some we happen to really like right now.
Yeah.
Yes. Probably the biggest autobiographical comic to come out in recent memory, the last couple of years, was Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. It's a national bestseller. I mean, it's
Times best book of the year.
Yeah.
Like so many listed. Look at the back, and I feel like I've done this before. Entertainment Weekly, USA Today, Salon. I mean, like it really kind of went outside of our typical comic book world into like the mainstream.
It had the most mainstream press I've seen in a book in a while.
It was a breakout.
And it was published by Houghton Mifflin. I mean, like these are published as books by real book publishers, not that Marvel and DC are real book publishers, but it was a real breakout, and it's dubbed a family tragicomic.
Yeah, I've said this the first time I read it, and I've actually heard it repeated in other places. It's very good, but it's not necessarily enjoyable.
It's depressing.
It's an extremely stark look at her life growing up and the stuff that happened, and like they owned a funeral home. It's called Fun Home.
Yeah. It takes place in the funeral home she grew up in, and basically Alison Bechdel, she's very very active and outspoken. She's a lesbian, and she's a lesbian comic creator, and kind of tells her story of growing up with the shadow of the fact of growing up with her father, who is a bit of an odd guy, and turns out died under mysterious circumstances, and they thought that maybe he was a homosexual. So it ties into her upbringing and her growing up.
A lot of personal introspection, reflection on her family, why things happen. Things like that. The illustration in it, the cartooning in it is extremely skillful. I mean, it's really good. It's a lot of talking and sort of showing a picture of what that looked like at that point, as opposed to say sequential storytelling. It's not quite that in the same sense as I think you think.
A lot of autobiography comics are like that.
Yeah. And a lot has been written about it, but we would be sort of remiss to not talk about it. It's an incredibly skillful comic book. I'm very glad to have read it. I'm
glad to own it in hardcover, and it deserves all the accolades it's gotten.
Does.
I mean,
it does.
I mean, I can't imagine what doing this was like. I mean, it's got to be harrowing to look at your family and to really kind of look at your parents and the way you were brought up and really look at it with that magnifying lens to figure out how you got to be where you were because of these things that sometimes you don't get a lot of the answers to. You do as much investigation and detective work as you can,
and you get the sense
you'll
that
never know
as you're writing. Not you, but as she or anyone is writing this stuff down. You're actually discovering the thing as you say it. And it turned out that's why. That is why I felt that way.
Yeah.
And so because that's so personal, it's easy to relate to it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you know, find something in those people. You know, there's sort of two ways you can look at an autobio book.
Yeah.
You can either look at that person and go, that's nothing like me, and it's fascinating. Or you go, I feel just like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a really good story to tell. And
Yes.
that's- People have interesting lives.
Now that's a pretty straight up.
And not only does that, it continues the motif of books with maps. there are lots of maps in this one. Every time there's a map, it's always good. So, yeah.
A sort of completely different way to go at, and it's a little more of an abstract autobio book.
So much that I was like, that's an autobio book?
It is.
Yeah,
I mean, it's about Skyscrapers in the Midwest by Josh Cotter.
Yeah.
It's not specifically autobio, but it's based upon growing up in the Midwest.
Yeah.
In a very like a religious and small town, like when you think of Middle America, what that means.
Real life influenced.
Yes.
And I guess partially because he anthropomorphized the characters
Right.
into these unnamed, whatever they are, type
Robots.
things. Yeah, that it's hard to assign human qualities to them, but
It's no
you
different
do
than
see-
Mouse.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, it is different.
This book, yeah, a lot. It's a lot. Ooh, it's got the ribbon. This hardcover is just beautiful, but this book tore up the indie scene over the past few years. I mean, like this, like the issues that came out were like now they're like almost impossible to find, and like I know people waiting ravenously for the next chapter. And then when this hardcover came out, people just like flocked to it and won awards and all this kind of stuff. He's great. Eisner and Ignatz nominated. Yeah, so. Won the Isotope Mini Comic Award. I didn't know that.
So what is the central?
James Syme wrote the.
Oh yeah, look at
What's the
that.
central premise of this one?
It's not a straight ahead narrative. It's more like a space of time in between a boy and his younger brother, and they grow up with their parents, and it's almost like the difficulty that he has fitting in.
Yep.
And it's symbolized by a lot of the fantasy life that goes on in his own head.
Yep.
It's almost one of those things like there's not a beginning, a middle, and end of the story. It's vignettes of things that happen.
And there are things that tie into each other that you remember things.
Yes.
And the robots and all
And
that.
they're very stark and realistic.
Yeah.
You'll be reading it and you'll go, oh my God, that's painful
Yeah.
to look at, in a way that, like, if you were ever felt like an alienated kid,
Yep.
like an 8-year-old who didn't know how, or a 13-year-old who didn't know how to communicate, that's what this is. And it's a very, there's nothing like it. I have nothing to compare this book to at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it's laden with stuff, cringeworthy remembrances of childhood and stuff like that, and like I said, the fact that the characters aren't people, and that every now and then there's these vignettes of these Cylon-like robots, and like things like that, take it a little bit out of the real world, but if you put in the mindset of the imagination of a elementary school kid,
Of a
it
kid
makes
who
perfect
grows up
sense.
to be a cartoonist.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah. So.
It's again, it's not an easy read. I don't think it's actually pretty fairly uncomfortable at times. The art is really
It's more cartoony.
it is, but there's a lot of cross hatching. It's very specific, tiny little marks and things like that.
Shading and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Lots of panels, lots of repetition and things like that.
Yeah. And he takes you out of the story a lot. He's got little fake ads and like
Yeah.
the whole, like this whole kind of world that he creates around it. But that just kind of, I think.
But at the core of it, though, is a real story about real people.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing.
And a difficult childhood.
Yeah.
Usually these books are the domain of the smaller indie publishers, but sometimes you get stuff from the big publishers. The next two are from Vertigo, from DC Comics. The Alcoholic, which is more specific. This is a specific exploration from this writer.
Jonathan Ames, the writer of this, is a novelist, I believe, and then it was illustrated by Dean Haspiel, who's.
Who I love his work.
Yeah.
Dean Haspel's work is so good. Yeah.
This is a very unflinching look at the life of a guy who, it's called The Alcoholic. So it's a look back at a life that had all sorts of opportunities and all sorts of things. Not that they were all squandered,
No.
Right.
but a lot of the regrets that go along with having not made maybe the best choices.
Right.
It's a look at a very rough life and an interesting life. Not necessarily a bad one, but he's got it opens up with him, waking up with this.
Where am I?
Where am I? There's an old lady who I think I just had sex with in this car, and I'm in New Jersey. I don't have any money. Like, I've been on a bender. Like, this is
Leaving Las Vegas kind of
There's a lot of guts it takes to tell stories like this. And I mean,
That's very true, because when I read this, I go, God, if stuff like this happened to me, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know if I could put that out there. I don't, my mom was going to read this.
Right, yeah.
well, not his parents.
And a very
Right.
honest look at the life from teen all the way up to adulthood.
and his best friend as a kid being in love with him, turning out to be gay, and one night they have sex, and it's just like There's a lot of
the relationships that are both enjoyed and ruined, and yeah, just it.
You know what's fascinating about this is because it's such a personal story, and it has to do with so many things that happened to him, you know, and it's not drawn by him.
right.
Yeah.
But
That collaboration has got to be
collaboration. I mean,
because these are both written and drawn
Right.
by the creator.
in this one, Haspel takes over and does what I mean, I can only assume is an admirable job. I don't know what these people actually look like, but
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Because that chemistry creates something new, something a little different. And it also like forces it. Sometimes when you have a single writer artist, that person can sort of meander.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got another person that you're working with doing it, it can make a better product.
And it's somebody to bounce off of, and I mean, it's that collaboration where, you know, I'm sure Haspel brought dimension to it that Ames never even expected. So.
I read this in one sitting.
Yep.
I you know, it's a great book.
I love there's a quote from Bret Easton Ellis on the back. That's brilliant.
You know,
The John Hodgman one.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of those comics. Pretty much all. I don't know about skyscrapers, but pretty much all the books we've talked about in the next one are the books that you can give to people who don't read comic books a lot of times, and it's like here's a story about a real person. Read this and tell me about your preconceptions of comics afterwards.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then that I like about it. Another one.
Sentences was an iFanboy Book of the Month a few months back, and this is much different in subject than the rest of these books. This is about a guy who was growing up in Manhattan, and he wanted to be an MC. This was in the 80s when hip-hop was only just starting to become popular, and in smaller areas. It wasn't like it is now. It's you know, huge. And he wanted to be an MC, but he got involved in drugs and ended up getting shot and crippled. And it's his life, and this is a whole book about choices and how your choices will affect your life and change the course of your life. And he has his dream in his hands. He's apparently very good at what he's
MCing.
And then he gets shot, and it derails his whole. Like he's got his dreams in his hand, and then boom, and it's all about the choices you make.
One of the things that I really liked about this is that I listened to some hip hop throughout high school and stuff, and to see the people that he was involved with all along the line, like he was there at the very beginning, he was there in the middle, and
And he's still doing it now.
he's still doing it now. Like they talk about him going to a show with De La Soul, like in the early '90s, and how the gang showed up, and like I don't think of them like that.
Yeah.
You know, but all of the stuff.
You think of them after all that to the point where they're established and on MTV.
Yeah.
And,
Well, no, but they were at the time.
Right. Yeah.
Is the thing is like this is
sure,
when their first album was out,
Yeah.
3 Feet High and Rising. You know, and like how intertwined that stuff all was with the sort of crime life that was going on. The same thing, like he sold drugs. That's how he made money. That's how he did stuff at the same time to finance his rap career. Right. And at the same time, you know, he's with KRS-One and he's with MF Doom, who's very famous now.
Yeah.
And that's how they got there. And there's no. I know that this is like going to sound like naivety almost, but it's like
Naivete.
whatever.
I think the other one's a nativity scene.
Yeah,
It's all
exactly. It's
different.
Christmas.
Yeah, how the stuff is all
Yes.
matter-of-factly connected, and you just don't think about that as being the way that it works, but it is.
Well, people think now there's a lot of inauthenticity in hip hop.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, at least, for sure, everyone was
that
intertwined with
life,
bad
and-
stuff.
You know what's
Yeah.
funny is that it starts off and it talks about like how strong his mother is, and but at the same time, like he's into shit right away.
Right. He's a problem. He's got a temper. He gets in fights. But also, some of the stuff he gets in. Some of the problems are not like him being bad. Like one is
No.
just he's defending a girl who's almost going to get raped, and the guys beat the shit out of him.
Right. But I think
Suge Knight.
for me,
Was it Shook?
No, he's in the book.
no,
There
but
he is.
he likes Suge Knight in this.
Yeah.
He says, you know, Suge
Dr.
Knight gets
Dre.
a bad rap.
Yeah.
Because he was signing a deal. Like he'd signed a deal. He was going to be famous.
That's what I mean. He had a dream. He signed a deal. He had a record contract, but he was still selling drugs because he still had no money.
Right.
And then he got busted. Then he got shot.
And
it
one
was
of the-
just like,
One of the things that is like his take on what that is very different than mine because of the cultural standard of what is and what isn't acceptable is very different. And to me, that was the fascinating thing about reading this because the place that he's coming from is a completely different place than I am.
Yeah.
And
Well,
the
it's
whole
also-
thing is written in his
voice. It's very strong
which
voice.
Is powerful, right? Yeah. That's-
which is you know, if anybody was trying to fake that, it would sound ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like. Let's say some of Bendis's worst attempts at writing Luke Cage, for example.
Right.
But this is actual. This is real. It's
And also, he owns up to it. It's like, here's where I fucked up. Like, it's not like, oh well, poor me. I got. He takes it all on his shoulders. Says, this is what happened to me. I'm telling the story because I made these things happen. I'm in this chair because of what I did.
Right.
And that's. I mean, it's a very interesting story. Also, we apparently grew up about 3 blocks from each other.
Yeah.
Wow.
He was a little older than me, but the same neighborhood, which was interesting.
You dodged a bullet.
I did. Well, I was an MC for a while.
But it's
yeah.
amazing how
I was MC
his
Irish.
world is
MC Irish.
his world is 180 degrees from yours,
Yeah.
and you were right there,
I was-
geographically right next to
I
him.
was 3 blocks from where he lived, and in the beginning, he's a kid actor in Sesame Street. Sesame Street was filmed across the street from my apartment
Yeah.
building when I grew up. But yeah, it was really the first 3 pages. I was like, oh.
Fascinating. It was great to see Vertigo put out stuff like this that is, that is totally edgy and totally.
And this one also got a lot of notice. I saw it on a lot of lists too, a lot of end of the year mainstream book lists.
Yeah,
So it was really very good. And Vertigo should do more stuff like this in The Alcoholic.
Totally.
We'll come back with a couple more after this.
Hey everybody, GoDaddy.com has what you need. And what do you need? Well, .com names are as low as $1.99 a month. They got world-class hosting, fast and free website builders. GoDaddy's hosting plans have 99.9% uptime, free 24/7 support, and no annual commitment. The private domain registration from GoDaddy.com protects your privacy by keeping your address, phone number, and more out of the public database. You can customize your own virtual dedicated server by choosing one of 3 popular plans or by selecting your own Linux or Windows server with all the plan options you might need. You can get a GoDaddy.com secure certificate for your website, and visitors, prospects, and customers will have total confidence in your online business. And if you're a podcaster or a video blogger, you're going to want a .tv domain name to stand out from the crowd. Also, be sure to check out revision3.com/GoDaddy for all iFanboys GoDaddy deals and codes. Thanks to Netflix for sponsoring this episode of iFanboy. With Netflix, you can rent over 90,000 titles online, including lots of Blu-ray titles, with free shipping both ways to your home. They now have over 40 shipping centers, so almost all deliveries happen in just 1 business day. And Netflix plans start at $4.99, and as a new member, you can get a no-risk 2-week free trial membership by checking out www.netflix.com/iFanboy, and remember to use www when using that code.
A couple more books we have to talk about are probably a little more, I would say, typical about when you think about autobiographical comics. The first one I have here is Jeffrey Brown's Funny Misshapen Bodies.
We've talked about Jeffrey Brown before. Josh dies. I don't know the Heimlich maneuver. Do you? I don't know. We talked about him in his book, Be a Man, and
You're a big Jeffrey Brown
Unlikely,
fan.
Clumsy.
Yeah,
Stuff that
Clumsy.
he's typically done through Top Shelf Comics. This
Right.
is actually out from Touchstone, which
Which is
is
big book deal.
Simon Schuster. This is a real
Book.
It's a real book.
I hate saying that, but it's one of the mainstream book publishers.
Yeah.
Those books that we talked about before, and I'm very much a Jeffrey Brown fan. And it's one of those things where if you were to flip through it, I think a lot of comic book fans would look and go, I'm not reading
The
this.
art is small and
Right.
rude,
This is-
rudimentary, and
So not.
But the thing is, he's not doing that because he doesn't have skills. He's doing it.
No, but that requires skill.
Exactly.
That's the people who don't draw
Yeah.
don't realize that is not easy.
true.
I as someone who used to draw when I was younger and not nearly as good as anybody on the table, but that's difficult.
It's true.
It's difficult
now,
to draw
his
like
earlier books very much are
that.
what you
Whiny.
think of I don't know if I should talk to her,
Right.
if she does, and I'll kiss her, and now I don't know, I'm
Yeah.
sad. Now, I'm not saying that's bad, but it is what you think of when it is. This book is a different...
It's my favorite thing.
This is a step up not a step up, just a different take on how he does it, and it's much more...
I'd say it's a step up because he's better.
He is better. The art's better. His storytelling's better. He's making specific choices not to do it completely linearly. Yeah, that's not a word. He is telling about his life through sort of his career, basically. Through high school.
If you're a process person, someone who likes art, someone who likes the process behind making comics, there's a lot of it's about his time at art school and finding his artistic voice. One of the big arcs in the book is getting to he's a painter. He does all kinds of different art. And in art school, he gets to the point where he's doing these comics. And the thing about this is, this is the size of the pages, according to the story in here.
Right.
Like, he does the art tiny,
Right,
like this. And he just, he's a showing in his art school of these tiny pages, and all the professors are like, you're doing too small. You're supposed to be doing big art. He's like, no, I like doing the small art. No. And it's interesting. That, to me, was the best thing about it, was seeing his voice. Jeffrey Brown's fascinating, because we've met him and interviewed him, and from his books, he's very inward and not outgoing and very... he's just
Not imposing.
He's not imposing. And from the books, he's very shy and very... Not a very much full of self-esteem, which is almost directly opposite of the idea of putting these books out.
Yeah.
Like, you have to have some sort of confidence in your life
and
to put yourself
to
out,
put yourself out there, like,
totally, yeah, because it's a
and
risk.
to make it stand out,
Yep.
you have to show a level of honesty that is very difficult. And
Yep.
that is where... That's the bravery in doing this to me.
I just find it fascinating. He's a totally insecure person who's secure enough in his own self to put his personal story out there. Like, it's so, the dichotomy is so strange.
So honest and so
To be honest, but one of the things that he's said before, though, is that I'm not exactly the person. I'm showing you a side of myself.
Well, no one's exactly the person in
right.
anything.
And so, like, people think that me is going to be incredibly meek and frightening.
Yeah, you augment the interesting parts of the story. Yeah, exactly.
And it's a memoir, but it's what you remember.
It's also kind of meta because in this book he's drawing the other clumsy in the other books, so it's kind of like he.
But at the end, it's like how he got his first books published and what it was like then for him, what his experience was.
Yeah.
His drawing in high school and in college and in grad school.
Yeah.
I was really enjoyable.
Liked it a lot. Yeah.
And it's a guy. He's done a lot of books. He's doing work constantly for years now, and he's getting better. He's again, first glance, it doesn't look like this guy's going to be one of the masters of the genre, but he is.
But it shows that with the dedication and with the finding that voice, and putting out the material, it's finding that hook that makes the story engaging.
And when is he going to run out of stuff to talk about?
Yeah,
he's gonna get current soon.
Yeah,
it's gonna be like a Grant Morrison book, him drawing himself.
But so another book that's kind of similar to the same vein is a book by Mike Dawson called Freddy and Me, which
also an iFanboy Book of the Month.
I was just gonna say that. Yes,
we pick these a lot for Book of the Month.
We
want to get away from whatever the stuff we're talking about the rest of the time.
And this was a single graphic novel, and it was published by Bloomsbury. Yeah. And what it is it's Mike Dawson, who's the writer and artist, telling his kind of coming of age story. Family moves from England to New Jersey in the 80s and grows up through the 90s.
When he's like 10 or so.
And it tells his growing up all in the shadow of his admiration and love for the band Queen.
Now, there are people who are fans of music.
Yeah.
But occasionally people really glom on to one thing.
Yeah, they get they connect with something and get very passionate about it, and then become almost like it's almost cult-like.
Fanatic.
Almost a fanatic and like.
Do you know anyone like that?
I don't know anyone like that.
Haha.
Well, but what's funny is that I imagine that you reading this and using it, I can very much relate to
absolutely.
this.
That's one of the things I connected with reading about this was that it was this zealotry. It's personal, like you feel as if you're the only person the answer to life, and it's these songs that you love, and whether it's Queen or any other band that you
pick one out of the air.
Would you say what? Like Smiths,
perhaps.
But so any
perhaps
other,
Morrissey.
if it's Freddie Mercury or Axl Rose or Morrissey or whomever else.
Is there an Axl Rose version of this guy?
That'd be great if there was.
I want to see that book, Axl and Me.
Axl and I.
But excellent. But you know the world's truths lie within those songs, and so it's your mission to tell everyone about it, whether they want to hear about it or not. And Dawson totally captured that. He also captured like his relationship with his families and his sister, because his sister had an idolization of George Michael, which I thought was a great.
Boy, didn't that work out well for him?
Worked out great, yeah. Kind of like getting handed on a silver platter. Yeah, exactly. Because then George Michael later plays the Queen and does all this kind of stuff. But the thing was that the story isn't Queen.
And this is exactly the thing that impressed me, because when I heard about it, I thought, that's interesting, it's really cool, but I didn't know if it would be enough to sustain it. And the thing is, what it is, it's a framing device for everything else that happens in a life that is, once again, different and interesting than mine. He hasn't solved nuclear physics.
No, if anything, his life is like normal.
It's a normal guy, but
a normal
still,
life, yeah.
The twist on it being different from my life is that, like he lived in England. His parents are British. They moved over when he was 10. So he's coming at living here in the States from a different perspective, and it's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
Also, there's a lot of cartoony skill in this. One of my favorite things in it is the title page.
Yep.
I guess that has it's like a timeline of what his family
juxtaposed
to the release dates of Queen songs and albums
and events in the whole Queen world.
And like when you get to the end of the timeline, you notice people have disappeared from it in like pictures of his grandparents, but you notice people have been added to it in pictures of his immediate family, like when kids are born and stuff.
Yep.
And it's an amazing page.
Yeah.
I mean, like literally, I spent a good 5-10 minutes looking at it and trying to decipher it.
It was great. It was one of the best ways to start it, and you get a real idea of what the story that you're about to read. And it was just great. I mean, it really, like, I bought it purely on there's Freddie Mercury on the cover. I love Freddie Mercury, and I'm down with Queen, and I was like, oh cool, I like music.
Yeah.
But when I finished it, I was just like, oh man, he got it, he nailed it.
Yeah,
So,
and it was very. It wasn't revelatory in the same way that a lot of these books are when you talk about like a lot of these other books are saying really hard truths and things. It wasn't so much like that. It wasn't really scandalous in any way. It was sort of introspective. But even the fact to really love a musician that much, it was interesting.
And he totally, as someone who might be familiar with that, he got it. He nailed it.
Yeah, so. I definitely think so. Yeah. One little last book that we wanted to mention real quick. It's just because listen, I'll be honest with you, it's a bit odd.
Yeah, it's a bit odd.
It's Chris Staros' yearbook stories, 1976 to 1978.
So Chris is the is the co-publisher of Top Shelf Comics, which put out a lot of these kind of put out some of Jeffrey Brown's works and put out a lot of things kind of more alternative indie stuff.
It's this little. It's pretty much a mini comic.
Yeah, it's a mini comic.
It's a little nicer than that because he's got pull.
Yeah.
Right here. Of these 2 stories from him in high school.
In the 70s.
Yeah, and like, the second story this is literally the story, and I found this charming just because it was so like, I was like, oh, yeah, I've never read anything like that. He joined a rock band in high school. They had been hired to play their first gig at like a gathering of bikers, and
Was it the Mongols?
And then the bikers like get naked and have an orgy.
While they're playing.
Sort of, yeah, and it goes nuts. And then at the end, a girl's like, "That was really good," and she says, "You want to have sex?" And that's the end. And there's a story, there's a picture of Chris back then on the back.
A lot of photos from his yearbook.
He intersperses a lot of yearbook stories.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It's gutsy to put it out. I applaud you, Chris.
Yes.
I enjoyed it. If you're at a con, Top Shelf's booth, $5 as they have it. I think what is like $2?
$6.
$6? $4. I'm not good with numbers. $4. Put it down. It's worth it just for it's worth it just for fun kind of storytelling.
Chris needs to bring the mustache back. That's what he needs to do.
You need to rock that mustache.
I like Chris.
Chris is great.
He's a guy who loves comics, and he's like, I'm gonna make some comics, and this is what I do. It'd be.
I want more.
I was gonna say. Awesome
this isn't enough. This isn't enough. I totally want more.
Well, I remember I read it. I thought he was like, "Do you read that?" He's like, "Yeah, that was kind of weird, wasn't it?"
It was awesome. It was great.
I would like to read it again.
Yeah.
The thing about people who are artistic, they tend to look at life differently. So everyone who has that bent to them usually has a story to tell, and they have a story. They usually do it well. That's why people tend to think, well, who cares about life stories? Well, people with that kind of brain think differently, and they compile differently, and they put together stories like that.
Every story, everybody's life, it can be interesting.
Everyone's got a different story.
You don't have to be a superhero to have an interesting life, and
you could tell it in comics.
Yes, you tell it
I'm
very
working
well.
on my autobiography. It's currently 1,000 pages. I'm up to the 5th year. I just started kindergarten in the story.
Very detailed.
It's very detailed.
So if you know of any autobiographical stories that we should
extensive notes as a toddler.
I did.
that we should check out, shoot us an email at contact@ifanboy.com. We'd love to take all your suggestions, maybe for a future show.
Notebooks of.
You could leave us a voicemail at 888-FANBOYS with just 326-2697. We might use it here. We might use it on our audio show. Let us know who you are.
And come to iFanboy.com. You can talk about this show, these books, other books you like that are autobiographies, all kinds of things. You go to our weekly audio show, all kinds of stuff at iFanboy.com.
Yeah, that's a great place for the autobiography.
So 6th grade, that was junior high.
Right, and that's when everything changed.
Everything changed. My voice didn't change for years. And
You didn't really grow.
I didn't get armpit hair until I was 18.
Oh my god, too much detail.
That's what makes a good story. So I got caught masturbating.
Three, two. Hey, welcome to another episode of iFanboy. I don't know why you're laughing.
Because no one knew who was starting.
3, 2. So I'm not
You still can start it.
Oh, okay, all right. 3, 2.